Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the introduction. It's great to be in this wonderful medieval town of Visby. It's my first time over here, and I really enjoy it so far. And so let's just get started directly, and I'll dive straight into the problem. The problem that I'm trying to tackle is teaching students practical ethical inquiry. Let me illustrate. Now, doing ethics in a tech corporation is hard. Engineers can often get into trouble for trying to bring about ethical practices and outcomes. And case in point, Timnit Gebru, a leading researcher in the field of AI ethics who worked at Google, was fired by Google for pointing out problems in this algorithms as they were racially discriminating against people. And so this situation where one is trapped in a potentially hostile system that they're also trying to change is the belly of the beast problem that I'm focusing on. Now, the issue is that ethics education rarely focuses on teaching students ethical inquiry that they can practically use in the workplace. Now, yes, ethics courses are useful at helping students learn to think deeply about ethical issues while sitting in the classroom, but they really focus on the challenge of doing ethical problem solving in the workplace. So what do you do when your work is being used to oppress people? What do you do if you see your company is prioritizing profit over justice? Can you do anything? Should you do anything? Now, such questions are hard enough for practitioners, but they're even harder for students, and students are not even in those companies, and they are at a distance from them. And this really is the core problem. How can we teach students to engage in practical ethical inquiry at a distance from the corporate workplace? Now, my hypothesis is that we should try and familiarize students with the organizational structures of corporations, as well as strategies to navigate and transform them. Now, what do I mean by organizational structures? Well, they are the implicit or explicit rules that govern resources and people at an organization. And I divide these into three categories: the material structures, social structures, and culture. Let me illustrate through an example. In April of 2018, over 3,000 Google employees signed an open letter against Google's collaboration with the US military. The letter protested against the use of AI developed by Google's engineers for use in drone strikes. And it demanded that Google withdraw its affiliation with the military. And surprisingly, 2 months later, Google actually did cancel this contract. Now, the protests worked partly because Google's employees understood the organizational structures at play and how to leverage them. Particularly, I argue, they understood three key structures: the material structures, which refer to how resources are organized and who can access what resources, such as the tools and spaces available to different people. The open letter format is a good example of this. It can be seen by anyone and signed by any employee, which makes it a really powerful tool for building consensus and get visibility. The social structures are the second thing that they leverage, and that refers to how people are organized, like who has influence and power, how labor is divided, what are the social relationships between people, who likes who hates who, that kind of thing. And Google's employees understood that they, as a number of 3,000 people, have a significant leverage over the management. They can't seriously fire all employees at the same time. So they leverage that structure as well. And culture, which refers to the shared values, beliefs, and norms underlying all our actions. So example, market fundamentalism is a good example of this, where the company's culture is to always prioritize profit over everything else. And then technological solutionism is common with engineers who often try to focus on using technology to solve all our world's problems. And so in this case, it was actually a useful kind of cultural value, which is that technology should not harm people, which united all of the Google's engineers together and brought them to make such a big, powerful movement happen. So overall, this example highlights how understanding and leveraging organizational structures as part of ethical deliberation can be useful for effective social change. It draws on the work of feminist scholarship such as Donna Haraway and Sandra Harding, in that the more aware we are of how we are situated in societal structures, situated knowledges, situated practices, the more we can actually do something to change it. Now, if we accept this hypothesis, how do we actually engage students with these sorts of structures in the classroom? So this is where games and role play come in. Simply put, they can engage students with the structures of corporations by simulating those structures. They can essentially codify the material, social, and cultural structures of corporations as the rules and mechanics of the game and situate the student as a virtual engineer in them. And this can allow students to become familiar with models of real corporate structures and to practice practical ethical inquiry, all at a safe distance from the real corporate environment. Now, there has been a rise in games that have attempted to engage students in ethical inquiry, but there is still a gap in this area, particularly in the digital space, which is where I'm focusing on right now. Games rarely explore the problem of how to do ethical inquiry in a tech corporation as an engineer or a designer. Usually one or two of these are covered, but not all three. For example, Papers, Please is a game that engages students in a series of ethical dilemmas, but as a border guard dealing with issues of immigration. Union Drive is a game that teaches tactics of unionization and explores how to do ethical inquiry in a corporate environment, but as a grocery worker, not as an engineer or a designer. And finally, Eliza, a game about the ethics of using AI in mental health. The player does adopt the role of an engineer in a tech environment, but only explores the question of what ideas are ethical from a predetermined set of views. They don't learn how to actually do inquiry to change the situation. So this is the gap that I'm trying to approach with my game, Lights Out Warehouse. The game is an interactive visualization, interactive visual novel currently under development that focuses on issues of warehouse automation in companies such as Amazon and Walmart. No reference there. Now, the game is set in a fictional corporation called Nile Corp, of course, that is in the business of e-commerce and shipping. And the player takes the role of an engineer as part of Nile Corp's automation team. Now, their task is to automate the local warehouses. Now, ordinarily, this would lead to a situation where all the workers are basically losing their jobs. But is there a more ethical resolution that sort of benefits everybody? Maybe the players can secretly persuade the warehouse workers to unionize before they are replaced. Maybe they can persuade their team to develop assistive automation tools that support workers, not replace them. There are multiple possibilities. The game's narratives are actually based on a literature review of research on warehouse workers and their conditions. Particularly, I draw on this book called The Cost of Free Shipping, Amazon and the Global Economy, to inform the game stories. It's a really good read, a lot of fantastic essays from different perspectives. Now, the game has 5 main acts: the research, the robot, the warehouse, the slowdown, the deadline, and I'll quickly just rush through all of these. The act 1 is called research, and this act focuses on information gathering. Through conversations, the player learns about their automation team, the local warehouse, and the key objective assigned to them, which is to increase the output of their warehouses by automating the work of pickers and stowers. Now, for some context, most workers in the warehouses are pickers and stowers who move around the storage area, placing items on storage shelves or retrieving them from those shelves for shipments. In an Amazon warehouse, they often have to walk 10 to 15 miles every day in a strict regimented way with high surveillance and high monitoring, a really, really stressful working condition. Now, through conversations, the conversation is the main, I guess, game mechanic for this game. And they take the form of multiple choice dialogues, and the choices are designed to encompass a mixture of views and different ways of saying them. So, for example, here's a conversation with Priya, a teammate who believes that complete automation is good for society. And the player has a variety of dialogue choices. They could probe Priya on her views and say, okay, you may be right about full automation in the long term, but how do we ensure it doesn't exacerbate inequality today? Or they could be more direct and attack their point and say, I don't think complete automation is the way to go because it will make the rich richer and the poor poorer. The more the player focuses on building a positive relationship with the character, the more they are likely to get their trust and support later in the game. And this persuasion-driven dialogue system is, like I said, the core mechanic of the game. Act 2 is called the robot, and it focuses on what decision the automation team makes to automate the work of pickers and stores. The team has 2 options for the robot. The first is full automation of pickers and stores. So this will take the form of an item picking robot like the one I'm shown over here, which can move, pick, and store any kind of item all on its own. Now, such a robot can significantly improve output of the warehouse, but it will also replace most of the workers, and it's actually much harder to accomplish. The second option is the assistive automation option, and this will take the form of a robot that moves the shelves to human pickers and stores so that they don't have to walk dozens of miles every day. But this approach, of course, is less efficient than the fully automated option, but it is easier to actually develop and will support the warehouse workers, not replace them. What decision is taken ultimately depends on how many automation engineers supported in a meeting with the manager. There are a total of 5. And by default, they're inclined to go with the full automation option since that will make more money and it's a more fun project for them. But the player can change their perspective if they have enough support from the others and are tactical or persuasive enough in the conversation. So one example of a tactic, for example, with their manager, Brandon here, is that if they know that Brandon fears unionization, They can use that to try and persuade him towards assistive automation, which won't replace workers, arguing that full automation is bad because it can make the workers unionize more quickly. So you're trying to capitalize on the manager's fears to get them to do what you want in some ways. The third act focuses on the warehouse and the issue of unionization. Okay. By default, most workers are not interested in conversations about unions or anti-union because of strong anti-union campaigns. And so there are two key strategies the player can try to change the situation. The first is to get outside support for unionization. This would involve reaching out to a college friend who is part of a large union organization such as Nile Corp Labor Union. uh, such support such support can give more legitimacy to the unionization effort, but it may not be effective locally if these organizations are considered as outsiders by warehouse workers, which has happened in many cases in real life. Or sometimes these are large organizations that actually corrupt themselves. The second approach is to try and share inside information with the workers about the automation plan. Basically, tell them details about what tasks they are planning to automate, how quickly it will be done, and so on and so forth. And of course, this will alert the warehouse workers and motivate them to unionize more quickly. But if the player stays away from their office too long, or they're caught talking to the warehouse workers too often, they can be fired from their job. The fourth act returns 1 month before the final deadline, and the key issue focuses on the progress of the automated system and the upcoming deadline. If the full automation option was selected in Act 2, then things are not going so well, if it is much harder after all. And there are two options the player can pursue here. One is they can try to push the automation deadline and keep trying for full automation. And the other is to stick to the deadline, but narrow the focus of the robot to picking and stowing only certain kinds of objects, like a can or rectangular boxes, but not all kinds of objects. If they had gone with the partial automation option in Act 2, then things are going well because it's easier. And all that is needed is some testing with the warehouse workers. Again, the player has two possibilities. They can try and attempt to push the deadline by deliberately slowing down testing. And that means actually colluding with the warehouse workers to delay the testing process so that they get more time to unionize. The other approach is to, of course, to stick to the deadline and test normally. In both cases, if the player manages to convince the team to push the deadline by a few months, then it will significantly increase the chances of the workers unionizing, and they'll have more time to form a consensus about it. Finally, the last act focuses on deadline day. This act doesn't really focuses on any choice making, but it actually plays out the consequences of the choices made earlier. Specifically, it focuses on different possible endings based on three key variables: the player's status, the unionization vote, and the kind of automation tool that was developed. If basically the player is caught supporting unionization in any way, they'll be fired in any scenario. And if they're not, they'll be promoted or they'll keep their current position. Second, if the workers choose to unionize, they can demand higher pay, lower workloads, better surveillance packages, retraining programs, if they want to be automated later on. And in all of these cases, the robot will basically support the workers and will only replace them if the worker agrees to be replaced. But if they do not unionize, then their fate rests on the kind of automation option developed. With full automation, all human pickers and stowers will basically lose their jobs and be replaced. If a selective robot picker is developed, then those people who selected and picked and stored those items the most are the ones who will be replaced. And if the assistive robot worker is developed, then the workload of the workers will surprisingly triple. So in actually what happened in real life was that now that the robot workers were bringing shelves to the workers, Amazon realized that the workers don't have to spend as much time walking around the warehouse. So now they can pick up and store more items. So their workload actually tripled, and there were more injuries that happened in real life because of this than were happening before. So that's why unionization is so important. So overall, I would say through this design, the game aims to engage players with the structures of corporate tech organizations. So the player needs to understand and leverage the material structures, such as the surveillance system, the budget and time of the company, the warehouse wage structure, and so on. They have to know these things. They have to engage with social structures, such as the company hierarchy, the social groups and dynamics of employees, and the fears and desires of different individuals, like the fear of the manager. And they have to engage with cultural structures, such as the union culture of the warehouse and company, the market fundamentalism of the manager, the technological solutionism of the engineers, and so on and so forth. So through this design, the game aims to encourage students to consider not just the technical aspects of their work, but also the material, social, and cultural structures of their organizations in order to practically bring about ethical outcomes. Now, there are a couple of potential limitations that can arise with this project. First, the strategies that I suggested, such as colluding with the warehouse workers or trying to trick your manager, aren't necessarily going to work in real life. But the point of the game is to help students learn that they can think of doing things beyond purely their technical work. And those require really understanding the organization structures in order to be done effectively. Secondly, it might seem that the game is basically propaganda for unionization, but in practice, the game aims to in practice, the game aims to actually help players understand the conditions in which unionization works and when it doesn't. For example, unions are also not really like not always saints. They can also be corrupt and siphon off workers' salaries and be corrupt themselves. So understanding a union structure is also therefore important to ethical inquiry. And finally, the game currently doesn't involve the racial and gendered aspects at all. And I think these are really important things to be considered, and as they really significantly impact the social structures and dynamics at play. And the game will either need to include them later on or be complemented with discussions about them in the class. Finally, I want to talk about next steps that I want to do with this. Okay, I'm done, but I can just quickly draw this diagram so you can see it. Um, sorry. I want to first like make a basic prototype of the game and get expert feedback from union workers, from practicing engineers, and from students as well. That will help me refine the game a little bit better. Then once that's done, I plan to integrate this game into a tech ethics course, which is taught by my former advisor. And the goal is to have the students play this game as homework, and then come to class and basically discuss the game or play a sort of role playing activity that builds off of the game. So students can imagine, you can imagine students adopting the role of the manager or the warehouse worker in the classroom and discussing and trying to find out ways to solve the situation in the classroom. And finally, once these activities are set and they seem to be doing well, I'll do an evaluation, a formal evaluation with the pre and post test to see how the game actually is effective or not effective in helping students learn about doing ethics practically in the corporate workplace. Here's a summary of all my slides, like basically a line by line summary. You can take a photo of this if you'd like, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.